you're not dealing with the driver, you're dealing with a scammer. This was the part of my job that's definitely the most fun. It's kind of like what you're picturing, where I'm finding a discreet place, kind of with binoculars, taking pictures, and sitting on it like super late at night, like, putting the whole story together.
Welcome back to the Logistics and Leadership Podcast. I'm your host, Brian Hastings. And with me today, I have lead investigator, national director, Jimmy Menges. Jimmy, welcome to the show, man.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. Appreciate you having me on.
No problem. On today's episode, we're going to talk about freight fraud, theft, different ways to mitigate risk, different ways to take action within the first 48 hours. And then also, how do we combat this? Some people call it an epidemic. Especially with our industry today, and who's in cahoots with who, and who's tied to what company. Just recently there was a $90 million heist that was uncovered in California. So how do we combat that as freight brokers, as carriers? We don't want to be left on the hook for having to write a check to our customer where we get nothing in return. Jimmy, I guess tell us kind of who you are and how'd you get into this stuff, man?
Yeah.
It's a crazy game.
My intro into this world is very different than I think everybody else that I've met. So I actually come from insurance. I spent my whole career up until this point in logistics as a logistics underwriter for big commercial complex logistics companies. And that's where I was really introduced to the underground organized cargo theft world. And when my clients had cargo thefts, we would contract and hire out a PI firm. I really kind of found myself sort of investigating it myself, developed more or less a passion, and kind of like became a resource in the company and on the team for cargo theft, and eventually got a pretty unique opportunity to do this full time.
I know that, you're in the middle of it. You're the guy that we call, in times of crisis. So thank you for answering the call. Personally, I've dealt with you a handful of times. Not something that we're proud of, but it's just a nature of the beast sometimes. And you've always been extremely responsive. One of the things I want to hit on today is, how quick you need to take action, especially for, once you find out that you have a load stolen or you have a potential load stolen. So you've been great with that, man. It's been, I feel like we hit it off and understanding more and more about kind of the organized, freight fraud ring, or, I think you said it a few minutes ago, organized crime ring, within freight that is today. I guess to give our listeners more of an understanding, just like a general landscape of kind of where we are today, what you see in the future. Give us kind of the rundown, man. What do our listeners need to know?
So where are we today? Some people say the climax. I don't think we're quite there yet. I'll tell you, we're consistently seeing new MOs, new criminal organizations get introduced, which only tells me that people are recognizing that this is a good business to be in. I think if you're in the criminal stealing business, cargo theft flies under the radar. I mean, we're starting to get a little bit more attention to it in the industry. But yeah, I mean, when I got into it, it was pretty much, you had the Armenians and the Sikhs, and you could tell quickly by different fact patterns which crew would probably was leading the initiative. Whereas now, we have evidence to show us that it's not just them. Now we're seeing different Hispanic crews get brought into it. We're seeing just new themes in general, which makes us think, there's a lot of different new crews involved.
Yeah. Are there any general parts of the country that are more prevalent than others, or any places where laws are a little bit looser, or what's that like?
So California, it's still, it's like California and the rest of the country. California, I would say almost 90% of what we see either ends up in California or gets stolen out of California.
Is that right?
Yeah. And I
holy cow.
it is a large amount.
Is that
Um,
because they have less restrictions or less laws, or there's not as much due diligence, or what?
we
Why
get
is
that,
that?
that question all the time. I think it's a combination. I think one is like, the Armenians and the Sings were historically out of California. That's kind of where they hunkered down and started their, sort of their nucleus. And then you combine that with prosecution rates are all time low in California, depending on where in California it gets stolen. Like Los Angeles County, it's tough. Like there was a while where they were, these guys were getting glorified tickets. They're starting to make some changes, and we're starting to see some prosecutions, but overall, it's unless it's a federal indictment, the reward is much greater than the risk. Like even if these guys do get caught, it's been a couple nights in jail.
I could see that they're getting a slap on the wrist
Right.
for a potential, $50,000 payout, or they're getting, a slap on the wrist for a couple days or whatever, going in jail for a couple days and then getting out and then doing the same thing over again and not really getting punished for, what they're doing. With California having such a high prevalence of cargo theft, is that like an area that people, like myself or like a brokerage should stay away from? Or is that an area that we need to just do a lot more, vetting of our carriers? Or what do you think there, man?
It's a good question, honestly. I think you just got to determine, you're a business guy. Like, so first of all, you need to continue to screen your carriers and train your brokers. We can get into that a little bit later. But don't ever like screen higher or screen lower if it's in California or out of California. These guys are moving too. So I should mention, we're starting to see a very big uptick in the Midwest. So Indianapolis is becoming like a second hub for the Sing organization.
Yeah, I saw that. I saw that a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah, they've been out there for quite a while now, but now we're really starting to see like a very strong presence in the Midwest. And so, these guys are continuing, they're expanding their footprint. They're going to continue expanding, depending on what motor carrier they hijack or buy or however they get to it, they're going to, be bidding and stealing freight all over the country. So
I got you. Yeah, I think it's definitely a tricky landscape, man. I think that's the challenge we face, especially as a freight company or a freight brokerage. I think somebody said this a while back, but I think identity is the main issue. Are you who you say you're representing? Are you with the company that you say that you are? So even with, a show like this, I want to use this and send this to some of our shippers, because I think there are some shippers out there that need to take better corrective action with pictures, with, CDL documenting, with, different types of, cameras, video, that sort of thing. Even, checking with the broker or making sure that the broker puts the correct MC or the correct carrier on that specific shipment, so that the person that we assign to a load or the person that we contract to the shipment is actually picking up. There are some shippers that do really well. We worked with a company out of Chicago a couple years ago, and man, it was like a 10-step process. And I swear, they had the social, they had, the CDL, they had pictures, they had the, truck and trailer, license plate numbers, everything. And, probably because they were a victim of theft at some point, a while back. But I do think that, with shippers, there is an area for improvement, as well as the brokerage side, where we need to document more. We need to be a little bit more thorough on that front.
the number one advice is general advice that I always just offer to the supply chain brokers, especially, is relationships with your shippers is so crucial, because so many of these attacks could be stopped at the shipper, and requiring them to do their due diligence and go beyond the trailer number and tractor number. I mean, at the end of the day, what does that tell us? Like, you can swap that out super easy. So yeah, having these carriers validate who's actually coming to pick it up, and and having that good communication with your freight broker, to validate who's supposed to be picking it up is so crucial. So can't stress that enough.
There's a couple of them that do it really well, and there's a couple of them that literally all you have to do is sign your name on the sheet, and you have the pickup number, and it's golden. So yeah, there's definitely room for improvement there. I'm going to shift over real quick. So say for instance, you're sitting there, you find out that a load did not get delivered, right? You get a call from your customer, you get a call from the receiver saying, hey man, where's this shipment? It's not delivered yet, but we got some communication from the carrier that morning, probably from funky email address or whatever. They said they delivered it. They probably forged the POD. They sent it to you. And then, your customer says, hey, this product never delivered. Where is it? What's going on? Now, you start to get a little bit tense. Your heart starts to race a little bit faster. What do the first 48 hours matter? Or why do the first 48 hours matter in these scenarios?
I mean, yeah, each of these, like the POD manipulation is almost a separate bucket versus these other ones.
Do we have time for that today?
No, of course. It's just first 40 hours, no matter what. 72. I mean, the sooner you can figure it out, the better. And the sooner that you can sort of train your brokers to look out and how to recognize some of these scams. Like it's so funny when I get somebody reaching out and they're like, hey, like I actually do think that this is the driver. They're broken down in like laundry list of excuses. It's like, you are dealing like, no, we spoke with the driver. It's like you're not dealing with the driver. You're dealing with a scammer right now who's pretending to be the driver. And so, that is get somebody else involved. Like there's a bunch of different things that we can do to tell you right away that you're probably dealing with a scammer, whether it be, we have access to different softwares where we can run the phone number, but figuring out who picked up that load and deciphering which scam we're dealing with. Like, for example, if they're laundering it through cross docks and local carriers, if you can figure out who actually picked that up, a lot of the times that guy doesn't necessarily know that he's helping steal that. And so figuring out who that driver is.
One scenario that happened a couple of weeks ago, or hell, it's a couple months ago now, but we had a shipment pick up in Alabama. The company that we assigned it to was a valid company. I think they picked up 1 or 2 loads prior to booking a load with us. And, they were active in our system. They were green flagged in our system. They picked it up. They then assigned a different driver to it. He picked up that load and went to a different location. This load was supposed to go to the Northeast. Well, he picked up that load in Alabama, took it to Indianapolis to a warehouse where, that's what he thought he was going to do. So not necessarily even that driver. The driver picked up the load in Alabama. He thought he was doing the right thing.
Yeah. So you're saying that he got hired. He probably picked it up from the load board and was told a different destination. That's what you're saying, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And then he, it was probably posted as like an Alabama to Indiana, and he called on it, got the rate or whatever, and then sent it or, got unloaded in Indiana. At that point, that the fraud or the scammer picked up or used a different carrier to pick up the load in Indiana and then took it out to Phoenix. So at that point, and they were playing along, the whole time that, sent in the PODs to I think it was a 2-stop load. They sent in the PODs to the first stop, signed or, forged. And then we started to catch on as soon as the customer said, hey, where's this product that hasn't delivered yet? So at that point, we're calling the shipper. Okay, who picked up the load? Who did you get this load from? Trying to gather information. Is that like the best course of action where you're just on investigative mode and going into, trying to figure out, okay, matching these pieces up in different areas? Is that the best way to do it?
Yeah. I mean, the shipper, like what was collected at the shipper is usually the most critical piece of evidence and where to start. That's not always the case. Like, again, these scams are consistently changing and developing, and, there might be some useful information just depending on the situation. That could be useful other than what was collected at the shipper. But yeah, usually having a good contact at the shipper to go and collect whatever was collected, if there's surveillance, obviously that's key. And, a lot of times also, like, I'll look at inspections all the time. Like, I validate a ton of different things just through the inspections.
Right. And when you say inspections, what exactly do you mean for the listeners out there?
Like the DOT inspections. So, if we know what the actual tractor was, or say we have plates, for example, I can tell pretty quickly if it's a stolen plate. Even without running the plate through like an investigation software, you can go look at inspections, etc.
So inspections, they got to have a lot of inspections for that tractor, for that trailer. It shows them on the road.
Like who was it? Who was it inspected under? Well, this was being inspected under what motor carrier? Well, is that the motor carrier that we have picking it up, or is that somebody different? So a lot of times, even if we can't figure out who that motor carrier is, because the surveillance isn't clear, we can't really pick up what's on the side of the tractor or whatever. Maybe they were told, I mean, these guys, these local carriers, it's almost like they play dumb. And sometimes they're kind of, I think, skate the line of they don't want to necessarily be involved, but they're getting paid. And so they'll do the little things like, put the paper placard on it. But if you can actually usually find who out, find them and find who they are, sometimes they'll play ball with you. And so sometimes the way to do that is, yeah, figuring out who they actually drive for, etc.
And I also think like even, you see some of those paper placards where it literally looks like a piece of paper written on there, typed out with like scotch tape around it. To me, I think we need to go to like there's no paper placards allowed.
We should be there as an industry. Absolutely.
I mean, I feel like that's an area that like, okay, this is like bare bones. This is a piece of white paper that's being scotch taped to a side of a truck that says the MC, could easily be ripped off like a non-legit company.
Unfortunately, like that wouldn't really even solve much because these guys, like, we've had investigations where it's led to, we've seen like they have their cousins or whatever that run a little shop, a mechanic shop that will do that as like a side piece of their businesses. They'll print out legit placards.
Well, I think so. Tell me this, and I don't want you to give out any confidential or proprietary information here, but what's kind of a particular challenging case that you've worked on and obviously has been closed at this point. And I guess like how did you approach that, or what's the best way, or give us some sort of story that you can tell the audience, something that we didn't think about.
I don't know if this story will give you any new ideas, but it's kind of a cool story of like how the industry sort of came together and helped me get what I needed to get like a search warrant issued. So this was probably the coolest capper that I've worked. It was actually like 4th of July. So almost like a year ago, right around this time. It was Agility Express. I don't know if you guys were a victim to it. There was like 50 different victims to this. And it was basically, they were bidding on these loads. They kind of like pooled a bunch of different motor carriers where they were holding these loads hostage, demanding ransom, and then just, picking and choosing which loads to steal outright. I mean, these guys probably ripped like 50 plus loads. I mean, there's a ton of different brokers that were involved. I think I had like just myself 4 clients that were victim to this scam. I'll tell you, a ton of my investigations, I'm investigating over the computer, and then once I develop intel on the group or wherever I need boots on the ground is kind of where I'll pull on my network or use some of my guys depending on where it is, and then they'll do the boots on the ground, the surveillance, whatever. I got added to basically like a big teams group of different victims of agility, and got a tip that this one warehouse would possibly could be affiliated. I responded, and like sure enough, while I'm there, I see a tractor pull in with a paper agility placard. And so, I thought at that point, well, we had what we needed. Like we were looking for these guys. Well, I found them. And this just shows you like, there's only so much you could do. Like at the end of the day, I don't have a badge. Even if I know who's stealing it, who the criminals are, like my network with law enforcement is so critical. Because, they're the ones that you got to lean on to issue the search warrant, present to the DA, et cetera. And so anyway, this particular one, I thought, well, one, I collected, I typed it in the group. I basically asked, what are we looking for? I'm about to see if I can get in this warehouse. I basically act like, I have a tracker and, I want to see if my freight's in the warehouse. Immediately denied entry. Kind of expected that. But at the same time, usually if you're innocent, I've also plenty of situations where they let me in, no problem. This one was different. So at this point, I call the police. I think that, I have evidence of these trucks here. I could explain it pretty good of exactly what was going on. Deputy shows up. And during this time, actually, I had followed a tractor out of this facility, and I'm recording it. I got the plate on it. I didn't continue following it because I was actually waiting on the police. So I had to turn around. Police get there. Police try to get in, and they deny the police entry too. Say absolutely not. You need a search warrant, which you don't really see that all the time. Usually, if the police show up, they play ball. So sure enough, they get no entry and trying to explain cargo theft, depending on, who you're getting. If they don't see it all the time, it can sound sort of complicated. And anyway,
That's surprising to me that like the where like they had the ability to deny the deputy access to the warehouse. Like obviously you have something to hide. Obviously, they know the law. So that's definitely very interesting to see that.
absolutely. And so like this is what I think like the citizen world doesn't understand. It's like, okay, doesn't matter that we saw the agility truck here. It doesn't matter that we definitely know that they are holding some of the freight at this location. If we can't prove that we have solid, if I didn't get a video of our freight moving in there, if I can't prove that this truck picked it up and this truck is right here, then we're probably not gonna be able to do anything. Like, doesn't matter just because I saw an agility truck there. I have to now work on the evidence, which that's the toughest part of the job. So this was cool because we had a ton of different victims. I sent that video, said, does anybody recognize this plate or this trailer? Sure enough, somebody in the group says, yeah, I think that's the plate that, picked up my freight and wherever, sends it back. We still didn't have an active detective involved within Elk Grove. And we didn't really have like a good case. So basically, depending on where the theft occurred is where the agency that's working at. And so super long story short, I ended up finding enough evidence by, I know I'm kind of rambling on.
No, I love it, man. Well, I think it's you're telling a story, and I think it's like it's important for the folks that are listening in, especially brokers like myself. I want to learn kind of the intricacies of it, right? Like you have a boots on the ground feel, and I think that's where we want to know more about that. We're freight brokers. We have different processes that we follow, but I think if we know more of that, okay, now we can fine tune our processes. Now we can fine tune X, Y, and Z to try to mitigate that risk.
Right. So kind of what happened here was basically, I had this trailer and the plate showing up during one of the thefts, but since I didn't follow it, I didn't really know where that trailer ended up. So that really wasn't good enough to get somebody super excited. Then I ended up getting one of my clients had a theft. I ended up finding that trailer. I went and collected the evidence and got really good surveillance of exactly the trailer, the tractor, the driver that showed up. I went back to that warehouse. I followed another tractor and trailer out of there. I kind of did my own little surveillance there. Found another warehouse where they were storing most of their equipment. Sat on that, and this is kind of cool. Like this was the part of my job that's definitely the most fun. It's kind of like what you're picturing, where I'm finding a discreet place, kind of with binoculars, taking pictures, and sitting on it like super late at night. Like, and it was putting the whole story together. And found both of these warehouses that they were taking trucks back and forth from. Found the trailer that was utilized in one of my clients' thefts at this location. So now I could pinpoint it. You could see that they were taking off the stickers and moving it, so that, you couldn't really. And you could see like the where the sticker used to be. So I got a good picture of that. And then we ended up we presented that to our law enforcement agency. We at this point had really good evidence. We knew exactly where they were going back and forth from. I had where my trailer exactly was at this moment in time right now. Plus I have it on surveillance from the theft. And then, and then it's pitching that to the law enforcement agency, getting them excited about it. And then, presenting it to DA or whomever.
In those scenarios, obviously there's hundreds of thousands of dollars of cargo being taken or being stolen. Does that not move the needle enough for some of the folks that have the authority to take action?
Not really, to be honest. Like it's still treated as a property crime. Like drugs and murder really move the needle. They get really excited about that, or kidnappings. Rightfully so. At the end of the day, sometimes you understand. Like, okay, I get it. You guys have some other things on your plate that are taking precedence. What was cool on this one was that because there were so many victims involved, there's kind of like there was people reaching out about publicity, and they wanted to post different publications because it was ended up being a very big success. So anyway,
did you get the freight recovered, or
yeah, so we hit both of those warehouses. And that's the other thing. It's like, even to get the search warrant signed off on, like the process, it takes so long. So it's just once we finally thought we had enough, it was just kind of, a waiting game. We finally hit it, and it was,
Good for
recovered
you, man. I'm sure
100%.
that's like the victory or like the fist,
Yeah, man, it's like catching a
fist
big
pump.
fish. It's like, yeah,
I love
that,
it. I love
that
it.
was
Well,
cool.
I guess tell us more, man, about like obviously, how does this impact business? And I think, for us, how does this impact business? Where we're hired to do a job and we're hired to pick up a load from A to B. And it's our job to vet out those carriers and make sure that we're using carriers that have a good track record, that have the appropriate regulations and, um, updated insurance and that sort of thing. Also, we're responsible for making sure that these carriers are who they say they are. It's always fascinating to me that some of these warehouses or some of these third party warehouses are getting paid under the table, or they might be getting offered, 5, 10 grand to, hey, I need this product stored in this place for 2 days. Well, you might get like a mid level, employee. Man, 5 grand's quite a bit to store product for a couple days and be an accomplice to theft or fraud. Like, I don't think a 25-year-old kid or hell a 30-year-old person really cares about that if you're offering them 5, 10 grand to approve a a truckload of whatever product to go into this warehouse. So I think that's what's fascinating to me is like the impact on businesses and how that works, especially in our space. And then also, what sucks about this is like the scenario that we had is that trucking company that picked up a load in Alabama and took it to Indiana. Well, who's paying them? Who's paying them the $1,000 or 1,500? Like, who's doing that? Nobody's paying them. Now it comes back onto us again, whether we want to pay that carrier, and it's not our legal obligation because they never signed a contract with us. But yeah, I always think it's fascinating the impact that it has on business and how this can throw a monkey wrench into everything.
Yeah, it's this time. I did a presentation recently to this big insurance company on cargo theft, and it got brought up. They had I think it was Oxford University in in London, basically do like a dissertation on cargo theft and like study the broader impact that it has on the economy and the globe. And it was super interesting, like what it gets into. I'll send it to you after this, but I mean, it talks about everything. I mean, it impacts everything. I mean, obviously, us as consumers, we're paying for it. That's no doubt. That's easy. Um, it affects clearly insurance companies. Now we're starting to see a lot of insurance companies not insure theft. They're not making money. That's affecting the overall business, the trucking business. A lot of small carriers are now just getting out. And again, it's actually helping the criminals. So one of the major scams is they will purchase this small carrier owner operator thinks he's selling his business, but he's really just selling his MC. And now they're utilizing his business to start stealing freight. And what they're doing is they're waiting for these guys' insurance to come up for expiration. And then they're sending these cold emails out. And this guy, the rates are what they are. These small trucking companies can't really survive anymore. And now these criminals are capitalizing on that. So now they're sending out these cold emails, and these guys, $5,000 sounds pretty nice right now because they haven't been making money. So yeah, it's definitely affecting these trucking business at large.
Well, and I think that's what sucks about it, man. It's like even the organized, cargo theft or the organized crime rings that we're dealing with. These dudes are smart. They know the industry. They know the game quite a bit. And, we've seen some things over time where they can fight their way through some loopholes, and they know what brokers are going to ask them, and they know that what the verification process is. We had an employee not too long ago. He came up with a driver verification process, and it's pretty ironclad in our books and what we've dealt with so far. That's a lot of time. Our brokers and our salespeople and our carrier salespeople, they're following this process, and we've mitigated a ton of risk that way. And that comes to my next question, man. What are some preventative measures that brokers or listeners out there can do to help protect themselves?
I'm happy you brought that up because I think that's probably the most important topic going on right now. And I think, going back to the basics, training your brokers on how to recognize these scammers. I mean, there's so many tools out there, highway, carrier 411, carrier sure. They're all great, but I think we need to be careful to not let that, you know, to not let that skew how we think about validating a carrier just because it passes. I mean, it's proven that all of these tools can be beat. They're great. Don't get me wrong. I love that, that they're out there, and they're honestly, they're even great like investigation tools. They offer so much data out there that they're collecting. And so they're all great, but really training your brokers on what questions to ask, how to recognize it. Also, how to not teach them, about highway, about the different carrier tools out there. I see that all the time that, I think that these scammers are calling in and they're learning more about the vulnerabilities because these brokers, inexperienced brokers will pick up and sort of like teach them what they're trying to validate them based on. So anyway,
No, I think you're absolutely right, and I think that's is it software? Is it training your staff? Is it a course every couple weeks? Is it continuing education? How do we set up demos with Highway or with the Carrier 411 on things to look for, things to look at? I also think from preventative measures, how are we what kind of risk do we want to take? And I think a lot of times, like a broker like ourselves, we use Highway as an example. We'll say a carrier sales rep gets a call from a carrier. They go into Highway, they type in the MC. We have like a pass or fail system, and depending on what that looks like, if it's a pass, a lot of times you'll see brokers just go in and um, add the carrier to the load, and everything else is golden. Until they walk off with your shipment and they steal it. But I think a lot of times they're like really honing in on what is a pass, what is a fail, what are some of the things to look for when you're booking some of these carriers. And I think a lot of times too, Jimmy, I think we've gotten so far away from like voice communication where a lot of the bookings are done digitally and a lot of the bookings are done over email, that you don't get a feeling or you don't get a sense on the other line where you're not having a conversation with these people. And now I understand that like it's a lot more efficient to book a carrier digitally, which like I'm a huge fan of. I also think that with the email process, making sure that these individuals or these dispatchers that you're booking with are legit and valid. But I do think there's some value in placing a phone call, or if you feel like somebody's on the fringe, or you feel like somebody is not as good, or maybe they're it's everything doesn't really match up. Well, I think you need to make a phone call, and I think you need to have a conversation, whether that's with a dispatcher, the driver that you're booking it with anybody with the company. Maybe you go to FMCSA and you call the owner of the company. Those are things that I feel like we're skirting around. And I feel like, technology is awesome and I love it. And, we're a huge advocate for using every tool in the toolbox. But I think there is some value in that where, we are kind of, overseeing or skirting by some of those things.
you're spot on. We're getting better. I think with cargo theft going to the levels that it's going, like we're starting to see those extra measures taken. But like, I'll speak with brokers all the time that, will tell me that they spoke with the driver while he's at the shipper. And I tell them, okay, well, that's good that you guys are implementing that. You're trying to speak with the driver while he's at the shipper. But if you're already doing that, why not ask to speak with the warehouse person that's loading them? I give that as a recommendation all the time. Speak with the warehouse person while he's on site and he's getting loaded. Say, hey, can I speak with your warehouse manager? Utilize FaceTime. I mean, everybody has a smartphone.
Yeah, it's good. Oh, I love that. I haven't heard that one yet. I was going to ask you something real quick. So, preventative measures, what I keep hearing from you, and then a couple of things that I said is just training your brokers on what to look for, how to do it. What are some of the shady actors, shady characters in our industry, and what they're doing today? Are there any publications that you follow currently? I know you sent me one a couple weeks back that helps out with freight fraud and where we're at. Is there a couple publications that you have that are pretty good that you follow today?
I mean, like I know that like the all these different carrier screeners will put out like a weekly email on different exposed MCs, etc. I know like the band report, they do the same thing. What I liked about him is he looks at like a lot of different shady insurance agents. What we're finding is that a ton of these agents and insurance companies that consistently either insure the double brokers or some of these scammers seem to be coming up time and time again. So
You mean
that's
like repeat offenders from the insurance side that they're also in on it, or they're not
yeah.
a
Well, it's not. I mean, it's theories. It's kind of yeah. I haven't seen anything proven at this point, but yeah. I mean, it seems like there's some shady agents and potential insurance companies that
so
are
they might write a policy that's invalid and put it on like an accord document and send it over to you so it looks legit, but they don't have anything with a an actual insurance company. It's just a document that they show that says they have
that's
insurance.
one thing, but yeah,
Yeah.
other times, yeah, it's like it's insurance agents that are helping mask a lot of fraudulent stuff going on. And so like looking at the accord and seeing who the insurance agent is sometimes will kind of be like a red flag tool. Like, okay, proceed with caution here.
I do want to talk about like POD um, manipulation and how brokers can look at that and like some of the things that they can do to overcome that. But how do we stop it? How do we, we mentioned training. What are some other things that we can do to stop this or put a little bit of a dent in there?
Yeah, it's good. Great question. I mean, coming together as a supply chain. So working together, I think, getting your shippers involved, making them, go the extra mile. Same thing with brokers creating a culture. So that was the other thing I wanted to touch on. Like, aside from training, like your broker's got to understand that, hey, we don't tolerate laziness here. And if we do an internal investigation and you shouldn't have booked this load, there's going to be something to pay here. Cause I think that's important right now. If we really want to, the freight broking world, we all know is super fast paced, based on commission. And so you get a lot of brokers on a Thursday or the end of the week, afternoon hours where they're not taking the time to go the extra mile to make sure that, they're doing the right things. And so I think, coming together as a supply chain training paramount, keeping your relationships with your shippers, super important. Those are to me the two things that stick out.
Yeah, collaboration in the industry, working together to sniff out these bad actors. Um, One other thing that you mentioned this earlier, but I want to think like even from the collaboration piece or creating a culture, it is more of a fast-paced business, right? Freight brokerage is fast-paced, just based on commission. Do you think, and you mentioned this earlier, on the show, around holidays, do you think that it's more, theft occurs quite a bit higher around the holiday? Do you think that's an uptick in volume? Or do you think that's from brokers having skeleton crews that are not as equipped to do some of the
Yeah,
work?
I think it's both. I think it's both. I think uptick in volume for sure that, and then yeah, and then also this yeah, what you just mentioned, like holiday people not working. Yeah, I always recommend like, if a holiday's coming up, put an extra floor manager, that's making sure that they're found their process when they're screening carriers, et cetera. And not having that available sometimes is
Yeah, I think that's it's definitely that's something that we've seen over, we have more cases and more shady actors that come out during the holidays just because and in my opinion it is because of the the skeleton crews where the main broker's on vacation or maybe taking the weekend, obviously available, and then you got like third, fourth, and fifth string folks that are manning the phones and doing the vetting. Yeah, that's something that I definitely think needs to be addressed. One another thing that I wanted to address here with the POD manipulation is that something where do you believe that shippers or receivers need to come up with a stamp? Do they need to have a sticker process? I feel like Costco and Walmart are pretty damn good at this. But even with the sticker process with Costco or like a stamp at different receivers, I mean, I think when I see a POD and I see like a name scribbled on there with a date, I like what the hell is that? I feel like a lot of times we have to figure that piece out. And as an industry as a whole, I think we have to do better there. I can't, like, how many loads get scammed due to somebody writing their signature that you can't, read it anyway.
Yeah, you
And then
can't
they put a
decipher
date
it.
next to it.
Yeah, the POD scam is tough because to me, like the receiver should know if a truck comes in, and there should be better coordination and collaboration between the different parties involved. Of course, knowing and understanding what the stamp is at the receiver, but at the same rate, these criminals understand what that stamp is as well, and it's very easy to copy that. Now, in some of our investigations, what I've seen is like, the different tracking systems out there. Obviously, if it's any load, you should be making your carriers track, and tightening up that the geofence. So, most of the time it defaults to 2 miles. So anytime that they're within 2 miles, they can just say that they delivered and send the POD. And we've actually seen that be the case where these guys are transferring the phone over to like a decoy vehicle, and then they're finishing the delivery in that decoy vehicle with the macro point, and then oftentimes actually even with the tracker. So even if the load is tracked and has light sensors on it, they'll go to a dark area, they'll open the trailer in the darkest area possible, transfer it to a shoebox, and they'll bring that shoebox to a decoy vehicle that will actually finish that delivery the next morning.
Well, and they'll go, what you're saying is they'll take the shoebox to the receiver. So it looks like
Yeah,
they're
so
at
in the receiver vicinity. So as long as they're within 2 miles, seems like that's the standard. Now you can
Yeah.
change that, and I would recommend that you do that.
All right, Jimmy, if I'm a shipper, what advice would you give to me to mitigate any type of risk out there in terms of theft and fraud?
Yeah, you put me on the spot with that question, but it's a great question. And I think that the more risk management you have, the better. So the first thing I would do is, have signage showing up saying, "Hey, smile, you're on camera." Just something as simple as that. 'Cause there's different scams. So if the driver that shows up is a local carrier that's getting, basically duped into laundering that freight, it might not work for that. But there's also a ton of scams where, the Sings, for example, they a lot of times will intercept it and steal it with their own drivers, their own freight. So having signage that will, say, incentivize, or basically just show that, that you're on camera, smile, taking photos, having a very good driver sign-in check. So that I know that there's this new software out there right now. I think it's called like Verify ID, where it makes sure that the driver's license presented is not a fake ID, that it's a real ID. It's available in every state. Like I know that some state law is different. It's still available if you need to pull it, but like it can't be accessible to, I don't know. There's each state has different laws. Making sure that the person checking in the driver is, I always say look at the cab car. So if the broker can collect the VIN or can collect information on what the actual tractor, identifying information on the tractor, well, the warehouseman can check that just by looking at the registration, which is usually available right on the door when you open it. So that goes a lot farther than verifying the trailer number, the tractor number, which we know that can be changed pretty interchangeable. Yeah, like making sure that your warehousemen are not only looking at the license and validating that it's a real ID, but also looking at it to just make sure that's the right person. I mean, these guys pass around IDs all the time.
Well, and I also think I've seen some, even from the shipper side of it, and I mentioned a little bit earlier, but, they might scribble in their name. And, a lot of times, there's a, heavy, population where the names are a little bit different, a little bit challenging. And, they might not put the right name, or they might not have the best penmanship, right? Where they're writing down a name, you can't even read it. And then all of a sudden they're going to load this person up with $50,000 worth of freight. And so for me, like, I do think there's a little bit of responsibility there. At the same time, there's a lot of responsibility on the freight brokerage side. I think from that, man, I think carrier identity it's a huge portion of it. For anybody that's listening out there today, I think that is one of the major things that we address each and every time that we book a load. and with carriers, and having those relationships are huge for us. I know at our company we strive to have a 70% return rate, or a 70% rate every single week of repeat carriers. Right, 30% of those carriers might be first time carriers that we're vetting out and using them for the first time. But that's our goal every single week. 7 out of 10 trucking companies that we use on our shipments have to be set up, or they have to be repeat carriers. In some weeks, we might fall to like 68%. Other weeks we might exceed the expectation of 75%. So that is something. Develop those carrier relationships, making sure that you're giving them business, you're treating them with respect. It's a carrier that you respect, and that is going to do good work, and more importantly, not steal your shipment. All right, man. Well, we're cutting close on time. What are some of your like parting words, or what are some things that you want more than anything for listeners to take away from the conversation that we had today?
Just go the extra mile. It doesn't take too much longer just to put a couple extra steps in your validation process. And if something stinks, it's probably because something's going wrong. So I would say, if you do have any issues, call me. There's a bunch of different resources out there that can kind of just start the process of, hopefully trying to recover that freight. I mean, I take calls 24/7. So the best way to reach me is just call me on my cell phone.
Great. Well, we're gonna make sure that we put some information on how to get in touch with you in the show notes. But yeah, Jimmy, man, we appreciate the time today. Hopefully, if you are listening and you're in the logistics industry, hopefully you got some value out of today's episode, and you're able to apply that in your day-to-day business to try to mitigate some of this risk that's out there and seems like running rampant, across the country. So, Jimmy, thank you very much for coming on the show, man. I really appreciate it.
No, thank you, Ryan. I appreciate you having me on. It's been, I always love talking about cargo theft. So,
Yeah.
do it
Thanks,
again.
Jimmy.
All right, take care.